Picture a 46-foot sailboat named Soulmate. Picture her sitting silent and still at a dock in Fort Pierce, Florida, the Florida sun beating down on her hull, the water flat around her. She is not going anywhere. She cannot, because stretched across her, boat astern, visible from the water, visible from the air, is crime scene tape. That image went around the world this week, and somewhere in Onsted, Michigan, a mother named Darlene Hamlett saw it too. She sat with it. She turned it over in her mind the way you do when something is so heavy you can only hold it a little at a time. Because that boat, that specific boat with that specific name, is the last place her daughter Lynette was alive. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old, a Michigan woman, a mother, a sailor who had spent 4 years building a life on the water with her husband of 25 years, Brian Hooker, 58. They documented their journey together under the name The Sailing Hookers, smiling into cameras, posting sunsets, cooking meals on a solar oven somewhere in the warm blue of the Bahamas, the kind of life that looks from the outside like a dream. On the evening of April 4th, 2026, that dream ended somewhere near Elbow Cay in the Abaco Islands. Brian told authorities that Lynette fell from their small 8-foot dinghy as they made their way back to Soulmate in rough seas. He said the currents took her. He said he could not reach her. He said he paddled through darkness for nearly 8 hours, roughly 4 miles across open water, before arriving at Marsh Harbour Boatyard at approximately 4 a.m. on April 5th, and reported his wife missing. Lynette has not been found. But on May 12, 2026, federal agents from the Coast Guard Investigative Service boarded Soulmate at Fort Pierce Coast Guard Station in Fort Pierce, Florida. They wore black shirts with yellow lettering, tan pants, and blue gloves. They carried items off that boat in evidence bags for hours. Here is the question that should chill you to your core. If Lynette never made it back to Soulmate, then why is Soulmate a crime scene? Darlene Hamlett has been asking that question since the moment she saw the tape, and today she is answering it. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you are watching this from. This case has reached every corner of the globe, and we want to hear from you. On May 8th, 2026, a Friday, Carly Aylesworth was watching. Carly is Lynette's daughter. She had spent 5 weeks with almost nothing. No answers, no updates, no word from the man who was supposed to love her mother. But on that Friday, something caught her attention in Marsh Harbour, Bahamas, and she recorded what she saw. 2 men were boarding Soulmate. Neither of them was Brian Hooker. Carly had never seen either of them before in her life. She watched them prepare the boat to sail, and then she noticed something that stopped her cold. They turned off the GPS, a 46-foot vessel, open water, heading north up the east coast toward the United States, with no signal, no tracking, and no foreign port able to follow her position. Carly posted the video on Mother's Day. She said she had not been contacted by investigators when she recorded it. She did not know what was going to happen next. What happened next was this. On May 9th, 2026, before Soulmate reached American waters, the U.S. Coast Guard intercepted her. Federal agents boarded the vessel at sea, took control of her, and escorted her to Fort Pierce Coast Guard Station in Fort Pierce, Florida. By May 11th, drone images confirmed she was docked there, tied down and going nowhere. The Coast Guard has the legal authority to seize any American flag vessel connected to a criminal matter. No warrant required. They did not hesitate. Brian Hooker had arranged for those 2 men to bring Soulmate home to him. He had been waiting for that boat, the floating home where he and Lynette had lived for 4 years. He is not getting it back. Now ask yourself the question that Carly could not stop asking. Why did the GPS go dark? Soulmate is a 46-foot vessel crossing hundreds of miles of open Atlantic water. Turning off a GPS transponder on a crossing like that is not routine. It is not an accident. Somebody made a deliberate choice to make that boat invisible to the outside world while it moved across open water, in the middle of a federal criminal investigation into the disappearance of the woman whose name was on the title alongside Brian's. Darlene Hamlett, sitting in Onsted, Michigan, learned about the seizure that same weekend. She had one word for it. She called it her Mother's Day present, and she meant every syllable. Darlene Hamlett has been watching the images coming out of Fort Pierce Coast Guard Station in Fort Pierce, Florida. Agents in dark shirts moving on and off Soulmate, items disappearing into evidence bags, a processing table set up dockside in the open air. She has one hope that overrides everything else, that somewhere inside that boat, in a cabin, a storage hold, a corner that might seem unremarkable to anyone else, they find something that belonged to Lynette. Because if Lynette's belongings are on that boat, the story Brian Hooker told about that night changes entirely. The agents working Soulmate are not conducting a routine inspection. These are Coast Guard Investigative Service officers, federal law enforcement working hand in hand with the Department of Justice, with the entire weight of the federal government available to them, including the ability to call on the FBI. Forensic scientist Joseph Scott Morgan, one of the country's leading applied forensics experts, confirmed what investigators are most likely searching for. He said they would be examining every surface for physical trace evidence, looking for signs of any area that had been cleaned or treated in a way inconsistent with normal life aboard a boat. He noted they would also be checking for any evidence of structural disturbance, something broken, something moved, something that does not fit. That last detail carries a quiet but unmistakable weight. Morgan was also honest about the challenge facing investigators. Seizing Soulmate more than a month after Lynette disappeared puts the forensic team in a difficult position. His exact words, "The more time trickles through the hourglass, all that stuff becomes degraded. It becomes compromised." He added that investigators cannot be certain who may have been aboard that vessel in the weeks between April 4th and the seizure on May 9th. Time is not on their side. The agents know this. They are moving accordingly. But here is what time cannot touch. The digital records stored remotely, navigation logs, satellite positioning, communication data, exist in a place Brian Hooker cannot reach. Whatever that boat recorded, transmitted, or tracked on the night of April 4th, 2026, sits untouched in servers he has no access to. Maritime law expert Kenneth Engerand, an adjunct professor at the University of Houston Law Center, confirmed that federal authorities retain full jurisdiction over this vessel and everything connected to it, and that charges can still be pursued, even without recovering a body, provided the evidence supports it. Darlene understands what that means. It means the truth about what happened to her daughter may not require the ocean to give anything back. It may only require the agents at Fort Pierce to keep turning over what is already there, waiting, undisturbed, inside the boat named Soulmate. Darlene Hamlett has been doing her own work, not with investigators. They have shared almost nothing with her directly. She has been going back through her own conversations, comparing what Brian told her personally in the days after Lynette disappeared against what he told other people, laying each account alongside the others like pieces of a puzzle that refuses to fit. The flares are where she starts. Brian told Darlene he had fired 2 flares from the dinghy that night, 2 signals sent up into the dark above the waters off Elbow Cay, Bahamas. He said 2 boats passed him and neither one responded. It was a detail he offered to explain why no one came, why he was out there alone for so long. But when investigators examined the flare gun, only 1 flare had been discharged. The second was still loaded, still in the chamber, unused. Darlene sat with that for a long time. Then she thought about what Brian said about reaching Marsh Harbor. He described the ground as sharp on his feet, a hard and painful crossing along a rocky Bahamian shoreline in the dark, alone, trying to find someone who could help him. A man pushing through real physical difficulty to get to his wife. When rescuers reached him at Marsh Harbor boatyards in the early hours of April 5th, 2026, Brian Hooker was wearing blue slides. Edward Smith, a security employee working the overnight shift at Marsh Harbor boatyards that morning, was the one who found him. He told investigators that a man arrived on the property, exhausted, talking about a key and a woman. Smith said Brian told him he had fired 2 flares, that 2 boats had passed without responding, and that the wind had been blowing so hard he simply could not see in the dark. Smith called the Royal Bahamas Police Force. Officers arrived at approximately 5 a.m. They were still there, still taking down Brian's account, when Smith's shift ended 2 hours later. Picture that scene for a moment. A man washes up on a dark stretch of rocky coastline in Marsh Harbor. He makes it to a boatyard. He tells a night security guard his wife is missing. The guard calls the police. For 2 full hours, in the small, quiet hours of Easter Sunday morning, April 5th, 2026. Brian Hooker sits with officers and tells his story. Brian also told Darlene he had knocked on 2 doors in Marsh Harbour and received no answer. That he had stopped a vehicle on a nearby road, told the driver his wife was missing, and watched the driver leave without a word. Darlene has lived on a lake her whole life. She knows how people behave on the water. Her response to that sequence is precise. If someone raises their arm in distress, day or night, rough weather or calm, somebody comes. 2 flares ignored, 2 doors unanswered, a driver who left. In Brian's version of that night, everyone looked away. And still, when the fire and rescue teams launched their search for Lynette the next morning, Brian had given them only one piece of identifying information about what she was wearing: a black 2-piece swimsuit. He never mentioned the royal blue headscarf, the aquamarine cover-up, the black bag she carried, the dry bag. Rescue teams went out on the water searching for a woman they could not have recognized, even if they had found her. Darlene Hamlett found out how her granddaughter learned that Lynette was missing. Not in person. Not through a conversation that prepared her for what was coming. Brian called Carly on the evening of April 5th, 2026, around 8 to 8:30 p.m., and told her in Carly's own words like it was nothing. "Hey, your mum is missing. We don't know where she is. She's been missing since last night, but we're going to come up there soon to see you." Matter of fact. Then he began talking again, and suddenly ended the call. Carly was left holding a phone in silence, trying to make sense of what she had just heard. How do you just lose my mum? Darlene has carried that image ever since. Her granddaughter, standing somewhere alone, absorbing the news that her mother had been gone for a full night before anyone thought to tell her. After that call, there was one more communication from Brian. A voicemail, not to comfort Carly, not to grieve with her, but to relay a search update. Hopetown Search and Rescue had recovered a flotation device, he said, the one he claimed to have thrown to Lynette when she went overboard. He called to report it like a status update. Then the line went quiet. And it has stayed quiet. 6 weeks. Darlene Hamlett has not heard Brian Hooker's voice since the earliest days after Lynette disappeared. Neither has Lynette's father. Neither has Lynette's brother. And Carly Aylesworth, the young woman Brian raised from the age of 3, the daughter he watched grow up across 26 years of her life, turned 29 years old in May 2026 without a single word from him. Not a call, not a message, not a text. Darlene sits with that fact the same way she sits with all of it, quietly, carefully, turning it over. She knows what it means when the person at the center of a tragedy goes completely dark on the people who love the one who is gone. She has spent 6 weeks watching the grief of everyone around her, her granddaughter's first Mother's Day without her mother, the birthday that passed in silence, and she has watched all of it alone because the one person who could explain any of it has chosen to say nothing. Lynette Hooker grew up in Onstead, Michigan. She was somebody's daughter, somebody's mother, somebody's whole world. She deserved more than a phone call that ended before the shock could settle, and she deserves more than this silence. Darlene Hamlett, watch those interviews. On April 14th, 2026, the morning after Brian Hooker walked out of Central Police Station in Freeport, he sat down in front of cameras and told the world he was not going anywhere. My only focus is to go back to the boat and then hire or beg people to help me go find some areas to search. My sole focus is finding Lynette, no matter how likely or unlikely that is. He had also said in a recorded phone call with a friend that had been shared publicly. Until I get my wife back. That's my goal. I cancelled everything we were going back home for, and I'm going to renew my visa and stay here. Darlene heard those words. She watched a man, the man who had been with her daughter for 25 years, look into television cameras and declare that nothing would pull him from the search for Lynette. Hours later, he boarded a flight and left the Bahamas. The same day, April 14th, 2026. The interviews in the morning, the departure by that evening. His Bahamian attorney, Terrell A. Butler, said he had gone to be with his terminally ill mother in the United States. Carly Aylesworth had a response to that explanation. She said Brian's mother had been terminally ill for a while. She did not believe it was the reason he left. Darlene has not said it differently. After returning to the United States, Brian retained Michigan-based attorney Crystal Marie Hauser, who practices in Kalamazoo County. Hauser took the public-facing role. She asked people to give Brian the benefit of the doubt. Her exact words, "There's absolutely no evidence to support any of the allegations, absolutely none." When asked whether Brian planned to return to the Bahamas, she said, "I imagine that is where his heart is, but I can't speak on whether or not that's what he will be doing." As of May 2026, Brian Hooker has not returned. His exact location is unknown. His U.S. attorney has declined to comment on his whereabouts. The Royal Bahamas Police Force has never withdrawn their designation of him as a suspect. He has not been charged with any crime. Darlene absorbs all of this the same way she has absorbed everything else over the past 6 weeks. In silence, with clarity, and with the knowledge that the man who told the world he would never leave without Lynette, left without Lynette. Darlene Hamlett has a way of cutting through complexity. He thinks he's smart, but he's playing tiddlywinks while the feds are playing master chess. She is not wrong, and a maritime law expert confirms exactly why. Charges can be filed in this case even if Lynette Hooker's body is never found. That is not speculation. That is the confirmed position of Kenneth Engerand, an adjunct professor of maritime law at the University of Houston Law Center. His words are precise. They can't file charges without substantial evidence, but that's why they're on the boat. They're looking for evidence, and what will have to happen is the Coast Guard can develop the evidence that's necessary in conjunction with the U.S. attorney in Florida. Sometimes it takes more effort to develop evidence, and this is the case where that's the situation because you don't have the body. Darlene absorbs that. The ocean does not have the final say. What matters is what is on Soulmate, and what is stored in digital records that no one, including Brian Hooker, can reach or alter retroactively. Engerand went further. Because Soulmate is an American-flagged vessel, federal investigators need no warrant to conduct a complete investigation into everything that took place aboard her, and the jurisdiction extends beyond the boat itself. His exact words, "The United States is well within its rights to assert jurisdiction over statutes involving acts committed on a United States vessel. Those crimes can be prosecuted, involving American citizens on American vessels, even in a foreign port." That means the fact that this happened in Bahamian waters does not protect anyone. It means the fact that Brian Hooker is somewhere in the United States, his location undisclosed, does not slow this down. It means the U.S. attorney in Florida is already part of this picture. Darlene understands the weight of that. She has watched the forensic scientist Joseph Scott Morgan warn publicly that time works against evidence on a boat. She has heard him say the window narrows, and she knows, with the clarity that only 6 weeks of this kind of waiting can produce, that the agents on Soulmate right now are not wasting a single day of it. The investigation is not waiting for Brian Hooker to reappear. Darlene Hamlett had a habit. Every time she and Lynette parted ways, she worried. Her own words. "Are you kidding? Every day I worried. Every time we parted." Every departure, every horizon Lynette sailed toward that Darlene could not see from Onstead, Michigan. Every time that boat moved further from shore and further from reach. A mother always knows something the rest of the world is still figuring out. 6 weeks ago, Lynette Hooker posted a photograph of boats sitting calm and anchored in crystal clear water. Her caption read, "Not going anywhere for a while." Days later, she was gone. She has not been found. She has not been declared legally gone. Her page still describes her the way she described herself. Photographer/sailor, living my best life. Past tense now in every way that matters, except on a screen. If you were near Aunt Pat's Bay, Elbow Cay, on the evening of April 4th, 2026, or if you know who owned the sailboat moored beside Soulmate that night, that information is needed. The CGIS Tips app accepts anonymous submissions from anyone, anywhere, at any time. The Coast Guard has confirmed tips are being received and acted on. Carly Aylesworth has set up a public fundraiser to help search for her mother, or when the time comes, to help lay her to rest. That fundraiser existing at all is one of the heaviest facts in this entire case. Darlene has thought about what she would say to Brian Hooker if he is watching. She has turned it over many times. What she keeps coming back to is not anger, it is something quieter, something more final. He took something very valuable to me, and he didn't treat it with much respect. Lynette Hooker loved the water. She filmed sunsets. She baked cinnamon rolls in a solar oven on the open sea. She pointed out wildlife from the bow of a boat and smiled into a camera that her family now watches on a loop. Find her.